Okay, seems like we are live.
Excellent.
Yeah, again, love your microphone. When did you
Yeah,
get it?
thanks. I got it during the pandemic. Really started my YouTube show and wanted to improve. My original intention was, quote unquote, to get better at Zoom. So I thought I would, get a setup with better lighting, and I'm using a DSLR camera, so I've got the whole setup.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. The quality is superb.
Thank
I'll
you.
buy myself some in the crypto summer.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah,
Yeah, so
excellent.
we scheduled this a few weeks ago to discuss the state of venture capital and startups in Web3. But who knew that so many things would happen between now and then? How are you living through all these recent happenings with Silicon Valley Bank and others?
Yeah. So far, obviously the backstop, I won't actually use the term bailout because I think the bank leadership is gone. The like equity holders are washed out, right? So the bank itself was not bailed out, right? The depositors were provided with a backstop, right? And I think people who are sort of laissez-faire capitalists definitely need to understand that, and obviously there's a lot of hatred for Silicon Valley for some strange reason, even though it provides a very intense boost to the economy, right? But I would say that, like, if you we as a venture fund have been fairly sure-footed. We did have several portfolio companies with Silicon Valley Bank exposure, but obviously with the um, backstop, I think that's really provided, security, enabled people to make payrolls, and so ultimately it's been just a relatively it's been, obviously people's confidence has gotten a little shaken, but as you can see, you know people are interested in self custody, and they're interested in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin prices is going up. So it's in a way a call for better technology and better financial infrastructure.
For sure. Before we get there, why don't we make a step back, Ian? Why don't you introduce yourself to those who may not know
Of
what you've been
course.
up to, what keeps you busy, what you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm with Gumi Cryptos Capital, which is I'm a managing partner there. We're a venture capital firm which got its start in early 2018. We invested our first fund, a $21 million fund instrument, into the crypto winter of 2018, 2019, right? So we pretty much, deployed capital into that big divot or crater, and generally produced very positive results from that fund. I think the angel list data shows us to be a top 1% venture capital fund by performance. On the strength of that, our existing LPs kind of immediately doubled down. So our fund jumped to, so the fund two became 42. We went out to raise 60, and we ended up oversubscribing it to 110. So we now have 110 in our fund two, and we're kind of actively deploying that into this crypto winter. So we I think long term, broadly speaking, my thesis is really that open source financial infrastructure, will really, ultimately win, and it will be a vast improvement to the world's financial infrastructure. So my phrase is open source financial infrastructure will make the world more consensual, fair, just, inclusive, transparent, and innovative, right? That's really my personal ethos. And from a fund perspective, collectively, we definitely believe that the internet itself will become the largest market in human history. It's currently 5 billion connected users, on a planet with 8 billion humans, right? So the existence of protocols that protect, preserve, and transmit digital assets, I think, is going to be sort of a internet native way to conduct commerce, right? So I think that's really sort of the future where we're headed, and I think it's going to be, very, very. positive and bright future, given that open source always wins. It always produces the best software. And, I think the way that we're going about it is definitely scaring people. But, as we know from generative adversarial AI, we know that working directly with adversaries makes both sides stronger. So in cryptography, there's an assumed adversary, right? The entire point of cryptography is the adversary. If there's no adversary, there's no need for cryptography. So, like, the whole idea of cryptographic money is absolutely based on working directly with adversaries in the wild, right? Like wild attackers, people like state actor level threat actors, for example, who hacked the Ronin Bridge. That was reputed to be Lazarus or some collection of North Korean state actors, right? So the level of threat actor in our space is extremely, extremely strong. But the coevolution of our space with the threat actor is one where we just improve faster, right? My quote, what I like to say is Ethereum has improved in the past 6 hours more than ACH has improved in the past 60 years. So, we have to understand the incentives and we have to understand the evolutionary environment, right, for software. So I think people think we're doing it wrong. I think last week at Stanford, I said that we're providing an open heart surgery to the world's financial system. And, people who are spectators who are seeing all the blood, like all of the hacks, right? Recently, we had a $195 million hack, in the DeFi ecosystem, so we definitely have seen that was Euler Finance, right? So we've definitely seen quite a lot of blood, right? But we're going to save the patient, right? The patient's arteries are clogged. The patient is on the table, but we're going to save the patient.
Ditto. What are some topics that you've been witnessing recently? Anything interesting that you're seeing among startups?
Yeah, we're actually headed into GDC, the Game Developer Conference in San Francisco. That'll be next week, starting Monday. And, one of the themes that I've been really focused on is really mass adoption through the gaming thesis, right? So I think people are very radically misreading Web3 gaming. I think people think that the only kind of revolution is kind of a ground street level player led revolution, almost like the French Revolution, where the citizens stormed the Bastille. That's what they think a revolution is. But we think the revolution is actually taking place among developers, right? So, for example, the other day, Nexon, one of the biggest game publishers in the world from Korea, announced that MapleStory was going on chain, which is kind of a treasured IP, right? It's an incredibly powerful game community, very large community. So this is the investment of a very, very powerful multi-generational IP into this kind of NFT based metaverse on blockchain, right? So, to me, obviously that still echoes kind of the Gen 1 thesis around play to earn and echoes the kind of NFT, because the fact that they're announcing it as NFT is actually, I don't think that's how the future occurs, because I
Hmm.
think the idea that gamers, Web2 gamers want to buy NFTs is a mistake, right? What Web2 gamers want to buy is swords and spaceships and
Exactly. Yeah.
guns, and they want to buy skins, and the proof is already in the market. They're already buying those things, right? And basically NFT is a technology that improves the user experience of those digital objects, right? And when I say it improves the user experience, like at the end of your journey in the game, you can sell this sword back to someone else who can continue using it for US dollars or for some currency, right? And like that's an improvement, right? Like gamers have put their heart, soul, time, many, many hours into a game. And at the end of the game, all of their hard work and even items that they purchased are just deleted, right? That's so what I'm suggesting is, and that's just one of the very minor potential improvements that come from permanent durable digital objects that are separated or freed from the game, right? So like what I'm really saying is that gamers don't want NFTs and they don't want ownership because they've never had it and they don't know what it means. But I think once gamers learn what it means to have ownership over the game, over game assets, over game IP, they're never going to go back, right? So I think that's the revolution. The revolution is happening at the level of game designers, game studios. It's not happening at the level of the players, because the players don't care. The other reaction is that players think most crypto things are a scam. So, like, I think that's a flaw in game design. I don't think it necessarily has to be. Um, I think so. These are some of the themes that I've been, looking at, because I do believe that, with 3.7 billion gamers worldwide, that the next billion users of crypto will come out of that population.
Interesting. Yeah, we had Memple Reload last week. It was a gathering on a private island near Abu Dhabi. And we had someone, I think it was Da Vinci. Da Vinci was saying, like, hey, if we really want to like care about the user adoption, like we should think of like games and really teaching the kids about Web3 through games, and for them to be able to like make some money on games and stuff like that. And I personally think that's where we are heading in the future. um, I don't know if you remember this story about me, but I was in AI before I got into blockchain, and that's how I got here. Because my conclusion after I have written a couple of chatbots back in 2016 was 10 to 20 years from now, AI will take over so many jobs and humans will become so much obsolete at the workplace. And then the question will arise: what will be the next system of the wealth distribution on Earth if the job pay is not going to be relevant anymore? And I think gaming is just one of the ways to create a more like a fairer and more controlled distribution of wealth. And albeit we all think gaming is not a very productive thing, and I'll still think that it could be an interesting perspective of the future. But hey, do you think gaming is productive or not? And what do you think the future, like how the future looks in the context of like AI, automation, um, more fair distribution of wealth?
Yeah, I definitely think these are the biggest themes of all. I think, to answer your question kind of directly and bluntly, right? The idea of our games productive, right? So, like, $7.6 billion of venture capital went into Web3 gaming last year, right? So this year the number will be higher. So I think that the point that I would make is that those people are all being employed, right? Game developers, game designers, right? So there's a huge already economy in the creation and production of games, right? And I think the thing that's really interesting is so there's two dimensions to this. One dimension is kind of at the base layer fundamentals of gaming, and I think the other dimension is really more about the economic value of the gaming. And I think the initial kind of play to earn games were not really about fundamental economic value, right? Which is that people would play the game and they would become users of the game, And so, in a sense, the early play to earn games were kind of based on Ponzi-nomics. But I would say that, like, when you want to go deeper, the game, so if you go to Austrian economic theory and you go to von Mises stated very clearly that all economic activity flows from dissatisfaction, right? So the economic activity is really the desire to move from dissatisfaction to satisfaction, right? They want to move. People want to move, right? And so the economic activity that's
Yeah,
generated is fulfilling a need. It's fulfilling a need. So gaming fulfills a deep human need. And in fact, it fulfills three fundamental human needs, right? If you consult the philosophy of Buddhism, the three fundamental needs are the desire for sensory enjoyment, right? So games are kind of artistically beautiful, and people want to enter a world that is kind of beautiful, but they also want to enter a world that's fair, right? And has equality, right? And so people want, because they're escaping the world that's unfair and has inequality, right? So in a game, you can be anything you want and you can act any way you want, and like the game engine will treat everyone the same. Obviously, if you get, you know if someone shoots you in a game, right, then no one complains that the game engine treated them poorly, right? They only complain that they should have played better, right? So maybe they should have shot the other guy first, right? So like, in a sense, like the game engine is trusted, right? So people want to live in a world that's fair, that has rules, right? That is orderly and is also kind of visually beautiful. The other two kind of fundamental desires that are documented in Buddhist theory are the desire to exist, right? And part of the expression of the desire to exist is the desire to be like a superhero, or to be super strong, or to be like super clever, or whatever game hero you're embodying is kind of the desire to exist, right? That you represent yourself in a way that's more powerful than you may be able to represent in life. And then the third desire is actually the desire to not exist, right? And the desire to not exist is also
Wait,
represented in
how
the game.
come?
It's a beautiful system, and it's a beautiful system because the coexistence of the desire to exist and the desire to not exist sets up the fundamental concept of Buddhism, which is this concept of this disconnected or disruptive feeling about existence, right? That existence inherently produces this discomfort, right? Which is Buddhist theory, right? But like, when you talk about the desire to not exist, what that means is it means that the game actions don't have consequence on the real world, right? So people enjoy that, and the fulfillment of the desire not to exist is the desire to have a world where they can play out incredibly dramatic events that kind of govern things like life and death, right? Maybe for like soldiers, or maybe for themselves in the game, right? But like, that the true consequence in the world is essentially inconsequential, right? That people say it's just a game, right? So I think that's the feeling, right? So not only can you exist, but you can also not exist, and it also gives you a sensory pleasure and enjoyment. And this is provable in that when you look at the Great Depression as an economic time, entertainment was quite successful. People continued to go to movies and things because ultimately escapism is something that's very durable, especially under difficult conditions. But I think to answer your broader question, so just to hit squarely the idea that is gaming productive, right? I think gaming will become more productive. And the more productive gaming, it relates to network effects. So network effects are the simplest framing of a network effect is if Charlie joins an application, say it's a game, then and Alice and Bob are already there, then why does Charlie care that Alice and Bob are there? Right? So for example, one simple network effect is something like uh, Alice, Bob, and Charlie are friends, right? So if they're friends, then Charlie's like, oh, I see Alice here, I see Bob here. There's already value for me, right? That's like Facebook, right? That's the social network effect, right? There's many other kinds of network effects, but the base layer is, does Charlie care, right, that Alice and Bob are there? Super lightweight network effects are things like economies of scale, right? Which is, I care that Alice and Bob are here because they make it cheaper for me to buy the service. Pretty weak. Very weak network effect, right? Social is a stronger network effect, right? So to me, the thing that's kind of interesting becomes this is, what if Alice and Bob and Charlie become content creators in the game? So for example, the biggest version of this is Roblox, where Roblox is, dominated by this concept called user generated content, or UGC, right? Now, the thing that I think will be very interesting is that that means that those people are actually creating entertainment rather than just passively consuming entertainment, right? And the thing that I think will be a big economic boost in gaming will be AI assisted user generated content, right? Because AI assisted user generated content will allow Charlie not only to enjoy the existence of Alice and Bob, but actually to be dazzled by the worlds that Alice and Bob are creating that Charlie can enjoy, that are being boosted by AI, right? Because the history of user generated content is that have been no user generated contents in general that have been easy for users to make that actually don't look terrible, right? And so AI can help users generate content that other users can enjoy, and that they will look beautiful. They'll look amazing, right? As you all know who've played with AI, you know that the modern generative AI creates output that has incredible ease of use, but it also has incredible depth and beauty. So this pursuit of the desire of sensory enjoyment and beauty is going to be sort of fuel a renaissance, because that will produce economic value. So the existence of Alice and Bob will produce much more economic value to Charlie, and I think that produces a huge network effect and economic value of enjoyment and entertainment, which I think people have always desired. People have always desired entertainment. If you go back to the cave paintings, right? Like, entertainment is a deep impulse of humanity. To experience catharsis and to experience a sense of control over their environment and all of these kind of deeper human impulses.
Yeah, what I'm concerned about with like in respect to AI generated content is that the content itself can become like inflationary and cheap and expensive or overwhelming, and therefore will get bored with all these, you know, super impressive pictures and 3D models at first, but over time will be like, nah, it's like we probably can create like thousands of worlds with the assistance of AI. So why would you care?
Well, I think the following, which is that ultimately what it boils down to is it boils down to sort of the ability to have a meaningful conversation. I've been thinking a lot about this concept of replayability in gaming, and there's really two sources of replayability: shallow and deep. Shallow
Okay, explain
replayability.
replayability.
So, replayability in a game basically means, do you want to play the game again? Right. And, there are some games where you're like, I solved this game, it's over, right? So, for example, if you look at like an individual crossword puzzle, right, it doesn't have replayability because once you solve the puzzle, it's over, right? The idea of a crossword puzzle every week, that is replayable, right? Because then you can do it again with different content, right? So what happened is that that's content-based replayability, right? So, for example, if you look at something like World of Warcraft, a massively multiplayer game, they used content. They used expansion packs where it's like, oh, it's a new continent has been discovered. Let's explore this new continent. So it's content, right? So content increases replayability, right? But I would say just like a crossword puzzle, uh, there are certain games where you don't want to play again. And obviously, replayability is pretty important because if you're a game designer and developer, you want people to play again and again and again, right? That's what you want. And so there's two, which impacts things like retention, right? And so to me, the two dimensions of replayability are shallow. So shallow replayability is something like a slot machine, right? Which is based on dopamine addiction, right? There's loot boxes, gotcha mechanics. Like there's lots of mechanics that kind of addict people, to various games. But I feel that the deep replayability actually comes from a deeper model, and that the typical model that you're seeing and the depth of the model relates to things like mindset, culture, and history, right? The production of a deep mindset. And so to me, I'll give you an example. There are many people on this earth who have specific books that they read over and over and over and over. And they read the books over and over. And a lot of these books are ancient books, right? They're ancient books because the ancient books that people continue to read are the survivors, right? Those are the, you could argue those are the best books, right? Because they're the books, not only are they the books
So
from the
true.
base
Yeah.
level of content, right? Not only are they the best from the base level of content, but they're the best in the sense that they've aggregated huge communities, right? Which means the huge community of your book creates a network effect. So if you talk to someone about a lot of other people who are going to be like, I have interesting, cool things to say about this book, right? So those are incredibly strong experiences of so-called replayability, right? So if you read a book over and over and over, you're replaying the book. And where does the replayability come from? It comes from deep history, culture, and mindset, right? Which is that you're tapping in. Like one of the things I enjoy is ancient Greeks. So I like Homer, right? So I read the Iliad repeatedly, right? And the thing that's amazing is that their culture and the history and the mindset are different from ours, right? So it means that my superficial understanding as a modern American person, like, is limited because I don't understand the full depth of their culture and their history, right? So like the more I kind of try to sink into it and understand their mindset, the more kind of interesting it gets for me, because I start to discover, why does this person behave this way? Why do they think this way? And all of these questions kind of tell you about what it means to be human and what it means to be alive, because the mind has not evolved in thousands of years. So we still have the same minds and are the same type of humans, right? So what I really wanted to impart by talking about this kind of concept of deep replayability, is that um, user generated content is almost like PvP, right? So PvP is a deep replay mechanic that's in many games. It's called player versus player, right? Where players fight each other. And the reason why player versus player is exciting is because you don't know what the other person's going to do. And what the other person does is actually based on their history, mindset, and culture, right? So when you encounter someone and they fight you, their fighting style is going to relate to where they're coming from, and how they behave, right? So for example, you can have fun experiences in game where all of a sudden you realize that you're playing against like a pro player who's driving a Smurf account, and their gameplay is insane, right? And like that's interesting. Like it's an interesting
Hmm.
experience because you're like, this has never happened to me before. Like I've never played a pro player before, and I'm learning a lot. Like I'm just learning how they behave, and it's insane, And so this kind of thing of, you don't know, like that's a factor where you're exposed to a deep history, mindset, and culture. It's why esports works. The esports works because sports works, and the reason why it works is because when you see teams fighting or clashing, the teams themselves have their own deep history, mindset, and culture, right? So if you take the American Super Bowl, like each of those teams has a huge history and a huge, not huge, it's not huge. I mean, it's only American history, so it's pretty short, as most American histories are. But like, it's still a history that the fans have really deeply studied, right? So they understand why certain coaches are doing certain things, and they built the team based on the brand and the history and the culture of the team. So certain teams have certain attitudes, expectations, fans. And so like part of what you're seeing is you're seeing the clash of these different ideas of what the game even is, and this team thinks the game is all about X and the other team thinks the game is all about Y. And part of the deep replayability is like, well, let's see which idea is stronger, like which team has the stronger idea. One of the great funny sports stories in recent history is this thing called Moneyball, right? And Moneyball was basically a way of playing baseball where you basically don't go after the most expensive players who are quote unquote the best, right? You just buy like these really, really underappreciated cheaper players that can actually perform these really specific functions, and you just build a team using the best dollar value of player. Like it's a super amazing story. So if I definitely recommend you to check out Moneyball. Like it's a, because it's a mindset, right? It's a specific mindset, and it was a championship mindset. I think last year's Super Bowl, I think the Chargers were basically playing a version of football version of Moneyball. So like, it's definitely like become a super popular way to win. It's just play using money. Yes. I think one of the earlier questions that you asked was quite interesting in the perspective of the impact of AI on society, right? So, I think anyone who's played with ChatGPT 4, which is brand new, is going to realize that the advancement between 2 and 3 and the advancement between 3 and 4 is substantial. So, the ChatGPT 4 is very, very impressive. So, yeah, I see Julia saying Moneyball is the bomb. So I totally agree. Um, yeah, so I think it's it's definitely an exciting time. Uh, yeah, so I guess Ian seems to have disconnected on my screen, but I'm happy to continue to comment about the sort of evolution of
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. The evolution of AI and the impact to society. I think that's a pretty big topic.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, my laptop is freaking out.
Amazing.
It's saying the hard disk is not working properly, which is like it's never
Wow. That's
happened
truly
before on
amazing.
Mac.
It's a little bit like this whole Silicon Valley Bank, right? Which is that they're just these
Yes,
infrastructure. I define infrastructure as stuff that you really need that's essential and that you don't even notice is there until it stops working, right? So like, that's why banking is financial infrastructure, right? Because you don't appreciate it. You don't appreciate it until it stops working, right? And a hard
yeah,
drive is kind of similar. Like you're basically like, oh, of course the hard drive is going to work, and then it doesn't. So it really messes you up. But I did want to talk a little bit about
yeah,
this kind of impact because I do feel like when you think about the advancement between Chat GPT 3 and 4, right now you just have to think about the quantum leap that's available between GPT 4 and 5, and if you just kind of plot the trajectory, but it's already Chat GPT 4 is already able to get into some of the best law schools in the country, in the world, right? So like, it's able to pass the LSAT. It's able to the thing that's disturbing about its ability is it's able to pass the LSAT essay section. So it's not even multiple choice. It's really, able to write really articulately. So I think there someone tweeted this morning, what are the top 10 jobs that Chat GPT will destroy according to Chat GPT? So you basically ask Chat GPT, like, what are the jobs that you're going to destroy? And it came up with a list, right? So it's sort of a, obviously starting with really simple things like data entry, but getting even deeper into things like paralegal, or there's definitely a bunch of like industries that Chat GPT is going to take a big bite out of. So that's a really profound impact to society. Yeah, so I guess my commentary here is, broadly speaking, like I think both Ian and I are in the blockchain community, and I actually do have a bit of an AI background myself. I definitely don't want to overstate it because, I think one of the funny things that's happened is that everybody has become like an AI expert, which is I think kind of a ridiculous, but I do have a master's degree in computational neuroscience from Yale University. So I've definitely been tracking the development and evolution of AI based technologies for quite a number of years. And so for me, these kind of latest advancements are very, very amazing. I think this concept of a large language model is really a fundamental advancement, and I think the applications that are being built on top of this are pretty astonishing. So I guess the question that's so interesting to me is, thus far I've been resistant to kind of really investing in the AI world because it's largely been extractive, right? Which is that AI has been used to extract. And I think that the extraction, including things like people's attention, right? So if you look at Facebook advertising, they're using AI to target ads, right? Which allows you to extract more value out of a user's attention, right? So I feel like this kind of extraction paradigm is definitely a problem. Look, there's two Ians. He's cloning himself. Very nice. So I do think that the AI paradigm of extraction actually contributes and increases wealth inequality, as you mentioned. But I do feel that generative AI actually has finally not just a value extractive capability, but it actually has a value accretive capability, right? Which is that uh, you know powerful AIs can actually add value to the economy. They can actually do creative things. Like I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of like economy accretive rather than, because if you think about economy extractive, that's essentially a zero sum model, right? Which is if I'm trying to extract value, it means that value is depleted from you and given to me. That's extraction, right? Whereas, like, if you look at generative AI, one of the most powerful advancements in AI tech that I know of recently is not Chat GPT. It's actually AlphaFold, which is the protein folding AI. So, that's extremely profound, right? Which is that like AlphaFold is now able to compute the 3D conformational structure of proteins, just through elucidation of the DNA sequences, right? And the DNA sequences, we all have them, right? Like the human genome has been sequenced, right? The genomes of hundreds of thousands of different species have been fully sequenced, right? So we just by knowing the DNA sequence, you can actually get the three-dimensional shape of a protein, right? Which is previously an impossible problem to solve. And now AlphaFold has solved the problem, right? So this will mean new drug discovery, right? This will mean lots of novel drug discovery. This will mean a lot of like really, really incredible positive sum economic events, right? And so I guess what I'm trying to assert is that we've reached a tipping point in AI where it's no longer just trying to suck more money out of the same people, which is really kind of disturbing and contributing to wealth inequality. And now AI is actually contributing intellectually to our society, right? It's actually generating art, it's generating enjoyment. People are having fun playing with it, like, so in a sense, like, I feel like AI, people are developing AI psychological counselors, like Wobot is a funny one. So people are achieving mental health through AI. Like, there's so AIs have tilted from being purely extractive and contributing to wealth inequality to actually contributing positively to the economy and creatively, which I think is, and people can argue that it isn't creative, but I think by any normal definition of creative, of course it's creative, right? Like, in the sense that if you combine an existing A and existing B to create a novel C, that's by
Yeah.
definition creative. That's a creative thing to do. And people who are like, oh, but like, we had to teach this bot A and B, and it never would have been able to generate C if it hadn't seen A and B. It's like, you could say the same thing of a student. You could say they never would have been able to create C if they had never seen A and B.
100%.
So it's sort of
Yeah.
like how is that not creative? So that's my argument, right? So I definitely believe that these creatures, bots, whatever you want to call them, are creative forces, and they're going to create a positive sum economy, that they're going to add value, and they're going to be value creating. They're going to create novel value. And I point to AlphaFold in its role in novel drug discovery as being kind of a quantum leap for our the ability to pump out new drug products is astonishing based on this new paradigm.
All right. Cool. Let's discuss a state of VC as of 2023 for a little bit. What trends are you seeing? Are you seeing a lot of funding happening right now? Uh, or do you feel lonely investing on your own without too many other venture firms being active at the moment?
Well, we definitely have detected a pullback. I think that unfortunately, it's the pullback is correlated with an increase in the demand, right? So the demand right now, there's a all-time high of demand for venture capital, right? And the demand is really as a function of runway, right? Which is companies are running low on cash, right? They need to kind of operate. And I think one of the secular trends within the venture capital asset class is that we're seeing growth funds actually moving towards the early stage, right? And that's pretty tough, actually,
That's
right? Because
interesting. That's
yes,
interesting.
it means that
Because we are
there's a
doing the contrary.
okay.
We are actually like we've been investing in the early stage uh, for the past 2.5 years, and we are now shifting into the special situations over the companies that have been launched and have
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. So I
history,
think I think
the
this. I think
tokens.
this. I think that special situations are absolutely kind of like there's a middle ground, right? Which is that the middle ground is growth, right? And I think special situations is really kind of more like value investing, which I think is a novelty, right? Because generally speaking, venture capital is sort of like growth oriented, right? I think what you're describing is much more value oriented. And I think the thing that's really interesting about this from a thesis perspective is that there's definitely plenty of distressed assets at scale. But I think that the investment thesis isn't really a growth thesis so much as sort of like keeping valuable projects alive, right? If a project deserves to be alive and will eventually grow to be a giant, then you can keep them alive, right? Because the reason why the shift has occurred is that everybody who survived the dot-com boom, back in 2000 and this kind of late 90s, it knows that the best time to build huge companies is during this kind of bearishness, right? So building, it's a perfect time for builders because you can get a lot of talent, right? Facebook just announced 10,000 more layoffs, right? And so the talent that's coming into the market is pretty good talent, and it's getting deeper and deeper and deeper, right? I think the first round of layoffs, like I had someone arguing to me that those weren't the best employees, right? That these organizations got so overhired and so big that there were people that were inside the organizations who were mostly not doing much, and they were kind of just hiding out and like, getting the free lunches there and just kind of preventing themselves from being somehow fired, right? So the first rounds of layoffs may not have been the best possible people, but I think that now that the layoffs are getting deeper and deeper, they're definitely cutting entire programs. Like they're cutting entire, right? So when you cut entire programs, like you definitely lose deep talent. Like you lose really, really good people, right? Because it's one thing is to take a haircut, but the other thing is to like remove a limb, right? So like, so they're definitely getting to the point where they're cutting programs, right? So I feel like that, it's a builder's market, right? But the thing that's really tough about winter is that things don't grow. So the growth investors don't want to invest because they're basically like, we don't want to fund people trying to grow right now because it doesn't make sense, right? And the stress is across the entire economy, right? So consumers are going to purchase less, like everyone's going to do less because there's just less cash sloshing around. I didn't get that, but you could use the chat box. I definitely can see that. I think your bandwidth is a little bit restricted on your new device, but yeah, but I'm definitely use the chat box and you can kind of like ping me on it. But I think that my comment really on this kind of current macro is that, having seen things like the Series A investors coming into the early stages, it actually means that it's not a bad time to do early stage fundraising, right? So, early stage fundraising is going pretty well. The problem becomes conserving runway, right? So what you need to do in this environment is you need to focus on builders. I think one of the things we've seen that's an anti-pattern is that people tend to over build their teams. So they tend to have really big teams or look how impressive my big team is. And like, I think that's kind of a mistake in this market, right? If you're in early stage, you want to burn less and you want to build more, right? So what you really want is you want perfect founder market fit. You want to be a pretty small team, maybe 2 people is a good size. And, you really ideally want both people who are hands-on building product, right? So to me, like, I think a product focused engineer and an engineering focused engineer are like that's a good team, right? And to me, like, I can help a team like that, so, for us, we think that in 6 months, there'll probably be a little more, liquidity in the market, but I think right now it's tough. So he's cloning himself again. That's great. That's amazing. You can
Yeah,
do
it's funny,
audio
but
on one and
I'm from my
video on the other.
laptop. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you sound great.
Cool. What are some of the deals that you've recently done, if you can share that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've recently done a few DeFi deals. So we did one called Panoptic, and Panoptic, that particular round actually was not led by us. It was led by Uniswap Labs. But like for us, Panoptic was like a really exciting mechanism to provide options on top of Uniswap. And obviously for us, the participation of Uniswap in that was pretty important, right? Because if you're building directly on top of Uniswap, like you want their cooperation, like you want them to be, aligned and excited to see your success, right? So we think Panoptic is super
Course.
exciting.
Or at
So
least
DeFi.
be API compatible and
Yeah,
not
yeah,
wake up
exactly,
into
exactly.
a
That's
new
super
version that
important,
is
right?
like entirely incompatible,
That's
right?
super important, right? So when you think about the transition from like Uniswap v2 to v3, right? The change between v3 and v4, like it needs to be handled, right? So I totally understand. So we definitely enjoyed having Uniswap there. I think another kind of mechanistic and exchange focused investment that we made is called Mangrove Exchange. So Mangrove Exchange, aka
Mhm.
Mangrove DAO. Mangrove DAO is basically it's sort of targeted at solving the problem of TVL, right? Which is that in DeFi, obviously everything's over collateralized and everything is kind of like on chain, which is just lovely, right? But there are definitely times when it becomes less capital efficient, right? And so they have this kind of concept that they call offer is code. And what happens is you make offers with your liquidity. And what happens is that the offers enables the liquidity to be more efficiently deployed kind of on a more on demand basis, right? So it's a very powerful way to prevent liquidity from just sitting there, right? Because I think obviously that's one of the concerns. Like if you look at the shift between kind of the range finding ability of Uniswap v3 and kind of the v2 interface, right, you find that it's sliding closer and closer to an order book which is sort of super capital efficient, right? So the one way to define the exchange business is to say that an order book is ultra capital efficient and an AMM is ultra capital inefficient, right? So if you look at range finding in Uniswap v3, it's kind of a little step towards being more capital efficient, right? And Mangrove is an even further step to becoming even more capital efficient, right? So we definitely think that's a really interesting mechanism. And broadly speaking, we continue to do kind of DeFi mechanisms, and we continue to be excited about kind of the future of financial infrastructure, as I mentioned. So that's a big one. We also did a Sui Move ecosystem investment called Ethos Wallet. So we led a $4.2 million round into Ethos Wallet, which is sort of the leading wallet in the Sui Move ecosystem. Phenomenal entrepreneurs, and really really excited about it. So we continue to sort of do quite a lot in the infrastructure, middleware, and DeFi space. Obviously, I'm personally excited going into GDC to talk about sort of the gaming thesis, but obviously that's not just we're actually doing lots of other diversified things.
Interesting. Are you planning to come over here to the Emirates anytime soon?
Great question. I don't have any direct travel plan to Emirates, but I would say, it certainly could happen. It seems like there's a good bit of excitement there. Obviously, there's some really interesting kind of movement of capital that's coming out of that region. So, we definitely see an excitement or an interest in tech and a desire to advance the agenda of blockchain. So, we do think that those are all exciting secular trends, things that we want to follow closely and participate in.
Yeah, it's becoming quite interesting here. Like what I've been observing over the past 2 years is uh, so like Dubai and Abu Dhabi have to be considered separately because Dubai is like its own ecosystem, and it's usually like a lot of foreign money flowing in, and then like family offices are deploying capital into startups. Abu Dhabi has traditionally been the place where the sovereign money is being allocated from Abu Dhabi to everywhere on earth. And only recently has it started to be shifting towards like, you know, them trying to form the local fund managers ecosystems, and they are quite successful at this. More and more Web3 fund managers, who might just run into in the Galleria Mall and the ADGM, the local like free zone jurisdiction. So I definitely say that like next 5 years is going to be very interesting for this region.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be tracking that. I'm definitely having great conversations with folks like yourself, and other friends that are in the region. So, tracking it closely.
Yeah, I have to say I still miss California a lot, especially in terms of like the creativity of the early stage entrepreneurs that are there. So I should be visiting you more often.
Yeah, you're definitely welcome anytime. It's to me like the California culture and the scene is definitely unique. People have kind of overstated the kind of San Francisco doom scenarios, right? But like, if you
For
look at the
sure.
pictures, if you look at the pictures of the fire from, I think it was like the early 1900s and the earthquake, right? Like that was kind of utter devastation. The entire city was leveled, and again, like, in that similar time frame there was also a global pandemic in 1917, and then a Great Depression, right? So like, people who are saying San Francisco is over, like, they don't actually know San Francisco. Like, they don't understand that the fact that the ground shakes and destroys everything is actually part of the strength of the culture, right? That the culture, that the idea that even the ground that we're standing on isn't solid is part of this inherent sense of disruption that drives like the creativity of the region, right? So this idea of this creativity, vibrancy, right? So people saying, oh, Silicon Valley Bank, it's like a old established stalwart of the ecosystem, and it failed and it shows a lot of bad things, right? It's sort of like, we've definitely survived worse. If you want to Google image search on San Francisco earthquake and fire, like, you're gonna see how low it can go. And San Francisco achieved, you know, huge vibrancy, at many different peaks, and many valleys, right? So, I think that it's an incredibly resilient, creative, dynamic culture, and in a sense it's kind of infused the culture of global tech, right? So in a sense, the way people talk about things like safe notes and stuff like that's all like invented here. So like,
Yeah.
the way people talk about technology entrepreneurship, traction, and like all the language that's coming out is from here. So, I think obviously there's a decentralization occurring where Silicon Valley culture is now becoming global tech culture, right? But it doesn't mean that Silicon Valley is sort of on the rocks. I mean, there's definitely a lot of pundits who are kind of sniping. Obviously, Mark Andreessen wrote an essay about why he's still here, and it's not a completely unabashedly bullish vision, but he talks about uh really being a participant in the fall of Rome. So he sort of feels like the empire is still very big and vast, but maybe has some problems, but in a sense, like, Rome is still a great city. So, I think I don't know, that's maybe a little bit more of a pessimistic vision than what I think. I think one of the things that happens in the boom and bust cycles is that it's almost like breathing, right? Which is, during the boom cycles, the gentrification basically makes people, new entrants and creatives, impossible. They can't even live here because it's too expensive, right? So, in order for things to breathe, things economically should crash in the region so that new, creative, younger, excited people can come, as they've always done, right? If you think about the story of the United States, part of the mythology is the westward expansion, including things like the gold rush, right? So like, the sort of idea of the American dream and the pursuit of the Wild West is something that terminates in San Francisco. That's where people go. That, like, that's the home of Levi Strauss, the clothing manufacturer who sold two gold miners, right, from the very beginning of the gold rush, right?
Right.
Wells Fargo
Mm.
Bank, like all of these kind of like icons of the Western expansion and this kind of Wild West, right? People literally call it the Wild West. The Wild West terminated in San Francisco. That was the kind of like beacon of civilization and frontier expansion of the United States, and the culmination of what the U.S. doctrine of manifest destiny, right? So, like, obviously, after San Francisco, it was literally the moon, right? Which was, 1968, right? That was the continued frontier, which is, space referred to in Star Trek as the final frontier, right? But, like, in a sense, like, that frontier spirit is alive and well.
Definitely. Well, on this quite optimistic and positive note, I would love to thank you for the participation today. As always, it's a fantastic discussion, very deep travels into the merge of Web3 philosophy, religions, everything. I love you for that, Miko, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah, great times. Thanks so much. And, feel free to reach out over LinkedIn, and, happy to see some nice people commenting. Thank you so much.
Cheers now.
Bye.
Till next time. Bye.